Hello everybody. So last week I ranked the Spider-Man movies from the worst to the best. And there is a lot to talk about with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I could not fit all of it into the amount of time that I wanted to make the ranking video. So today I'm going to go more in depth talking about everything great about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Let's get started. Alright, so I'm going to start off talking about some of the stuff that I already mentioned in my other two videos talking about it. My favorite movie from each year I've been alive and the Spider-Man ranking. I talked about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse in those two videos. So I'm going to start by talking about Miles Morales, the balance of the tones of being self-aware yet having serious themes, and the animation. And then I'm going to get to stuff that I haven't talked about yet. So first off, Miles Morales. Like I've said in my other two videos, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse does such a good job at introducing audiences to Miles Morales. Because, like I said, if you haven't read the comics, if you're not... I actually haven't read comics, but I've been sort of in that world, in that nerdy world, enough to know about Miles Morales, so... But a lot of people watching Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse for the first time don't know who Miles Morales is, and it does a good job at getting you to understand Miles Morales, and it does a good job at doing the classic origin of Spider-Man, but now with Miles Morales to sort of give the general audiences, like, a familiar story. Like, I guess that's how it is in the comics, probably, but, it makes it so it's the familiar origin. They even reference the fact that it's the same origin because he holds up the comic book. And yeah, it just does a very, very good job at setting up Miles Morales, getting audiences to understand Miles Morales it does, the same familiar origin story, but it also does some new stuff. It adds in, that Miles Morales witnesses the old Spider-Man die, which sets up his character arc, like why he is so determined to stop the collider when it turns back on again, and to not let any of the other Spider-Men or Spider people or Spider beings to stay behind. That he's the one who's like, I'm not letting Spider-Man die again. If you stay here, you're gonna die because you're in the wrong dimension. So I have to be the one to stay behind, because this is my dimension, so I have to stay behind. You guys go back to your dimension. I can't let another Spider-Man die. So yeah, so that is really cool that they did that. They added that layer to it where he let Spider-Man die once, and that keeps coming back up with pretty much every single choice that he makes after that is because of the fact that he witnessed the original Spider-Man from that timeline die. And that goes into sort of the balancing of tones, sort of, because that's the very serious side of things of making a mistake and learning from that mistake, not making that mistake again. And then, there's also the leap of faith scene, which is really epic. There's the whole thing where you kind of, even though Peter B. Parker is teaching Miles Morales to be Spider-Man, it sort of has the other layer to where Peter B. Parker is learning to be Spider-Man again also, since he was kind of in a bit of a rut before. So he learns to take a chance, keep being Spider-Man again, take a leap of faith. That last scene where, right before Peter B. Parker goes back through the collider to his dimension, that scene where he's like, well, what if I fail again? And Miles is like you said, it's a leap of faith. He learns that also. He learns, just as he teaches Miles that being Spider-Man, making that transition to being Spider-Man is just a leap of faith, he learns the same thing. Like, he might fail. He might fail again with MJ. He might fail again being Spider-Man. But it's just a leap of faith. You can't be worried about that, because you're never going to do it unless you take the chance. And that's the kind of serious themes that's all throughout this movie, and that's the serious side of the movie. Whereas you also have the other side of the movie, the very self-aware, hilarious side, that plays with the Spider-Man tropes, where you have Spider-Ham, who instead of being bit by a radioactive spider was a spider bit by a radioactive pig, and you just have all this self-aware stuff referencing Spider-Man 3 when he's dancing. Uh, they really do a good job at balancing the two tones. And one of the other ways that they kind of use the self-awareness is by having the comic book stuff come up, like having the comic book thought bubbles uh, and stuff come up throughout the movie, and having the low frame rate with the animation to make it really look like it's a moving comic book. That's really cool that they did that. Like, it's at first it is a bit like weird to watch, like weird to get used to, but like it kind of feels like you should be wearing 3D glasses, but you're not. But once you understand it, once you get used to it, it's really cool. Once you can appreciate that they did that they went through the process of making it really look like a comic book. I really like that. Alright, so I've talked about all the stuff I've talked about before. I kind of dipped into some things that I hadn't talked about yet, like the story of Peter B. Parker. But now I want to talk about something I haven't talked about yet, which is Kingpin. Kingpin is such a great villain. I was really surprised the first time I watched it, because I was just thinking, okay, this guy's just the villain. There's gonna be no real, backstory to it. He's just kind of there to be the villain. You're more gonna be focused on Peter B. Parker and Miles, which you are, but that scene where they show his backstory, where he's collecting the pen, and you see the whole thing with his wife and son dying, that's such a great scene, because I remember watching it being like, it just clicked in that moment. It just clicked to where, kind of like the pen, I guess that kind of symbolizes, right, collecting the pen, but it just clicked in my brain, like, oh, he is so much deeper than I thought he was gonna be. I thought he was just the very shallow villain, just there to be the villain, but he has a few more layers than I thought, and that is so cool that they did that, because they could have easily made him just the villain, but giving him that backstory was so good. That scene was so well done. It really got me to understand where he's coming from as a villain. And that's something that is really great that when a movie does, because it just bumps it up another level if you can understand the villain. That's why Thanos is such a good villain. That's why Loki is such a good villain. That's why Syndrome is such a good villain, because you understand where they're coming from. Another thing that I want to talk about in this movie is the different Spider-Men. Like, I really liked how each time they introduce a new Spider-Man, they're like, okay, let's do this one more time, and they go through their backstory, their origin, how they became Spider-Man, how they got to this point where they're in the new dimension, and I think in doing that, I think it made sort of having it be Miles' origin story be more special, because now you see how all of the others have an origin story, and they all failed at moments, like I said, Peter B. Parker failed with MJ, and of course Uncle Ben, Gwen Stacy, Spider-Gwen, Spider-Woman, she failed saving Peter Parker in that universe. You have all of them having the same origin story, having them all fail at certain points, and you keep seeing that come up, so that way Miles, when he continuously fails, he can sort of realize, I'm not alone. They've all made mistakes. Like that scene where they're in, I guess, I don't know if it's really a dorm room, but like, they're in his room at the school, and they're all saying how Sorry, I just thought about how Spider-Man Noir says,
For me, it was my Uncle Benjamin.
like, I don't know why that always gets me, because like, I think it's right after Peter B. Parker says for him it was his Uncle Ben, and then he says, for me, it was my Uncle Benjamin, because that's like, it's the more formal version of Ben, so, I don't know, that's always been kind of funny to me, but they all are saying how they each failed at some point, and that sort of makes Miles realize just because he failed, just because he let the other Spider-Man die, just because he just let his Uncle Aaron die, just because, which I'll actually get back to Uncle Aaron in a second, because there's a lot to do with that, a lot to going on with that whole thing, but, just because he can't use his powers on command, he can't turn invisible on command, can't use his shock, electricity, whatever it is, powers on command, he can still be Spider-Man. He just has to believe that he can, because they all did. And that's such a powerful message, going back to the tones of, like, it doesn't matter what you did before. It doesn't matter that you failed before, because now you have the chance to rise to the occasion again and do better and learn from that mistake. And you're going to make more mistakes, but that shouldn't stop you from trying again and persisting and moving forward. Alright, now, I mentioned I was going to come back to this before. I'm going to talk about Uncle Aaron. Uncle Aaron is so great. Like, the way they handle his character, they do a good job at setting up the connection between Miles Morales and Uncle Aaron. They did a good job, they set up the relationship between them very well, so that way, when you get to that scene where you and Miles find out that Uncle Aaron is the Prowler, is like, oh man, like, that is like such a powerful scene, such a, like, painful scene of, like, oh no, oh man, like, that scene was very well done, and it always gets me the way they set it up. It's like, man. And then followed by, when they're on the roof, and Miles, since he knows that it's Uncle Aaron, takes off his mask, and you see, he's like, oh no, I was just about to kill my nephew. Okay. And then he doesn't, and then Kingpin shoots him. And you get the slow motion of him falling, very comic booky in that way, and you're like, this is Miles Morales' Uncle Ben. That's the equivalent of it. And I think up to that point, you sort of think maybe it's the old Spider-Man, the original Spider-Man in that timeline, Peter Parker, watching him die, and then you realize this is the moment. Because after this is sort of the incident that makes, because right after that, I want to point out, he turns invisible on command. So that is the moment that pushes him over to being just what he needed. It's kind of sad to say that's what he needed, but that is what he needed to be Spider-Man. And then, of course, like I said before, you get the scene right after of them all saying who they lost, you know, Uncle Ben, Uncle Benjamin, Gwen Stacy with Peter Parker, and just the whole thing with Uncle Aaron. It was so well done. It was set up so well. I really like how they handled that. And then, of course, you also have the scene with Miles Morales' father from the other side of the door. And speaking of his father, he has like such a big arc in this movie where at the beginning he hates Spider-Man. He's like,
You know, with great ability comes great accountability.
That's not even how the saying goes,
Man, I do
Dad.
like it.
which is a great line because it plays with the self-awareness. With with great power comes great responsibility, and he he gets it wrong. He says with great ability comes great accountability, and Miles is like, that's not even the same. That's such a great moment. That's such a great line. But so his dad doesn't like Spider-Man. He thinks that he's like, what, this guy just comes in once a day, saves the day, and he doesn't even show his face. But then the irony of it is that his son becomes the new Spider-Man, and he goes through, at the end of it, he's like, I was wrong about you, Spider-Man. You are a hero, you're amazing. And then you have the funny moment where Miles is like,
I love you. Wait, what?
because it's his dad. That's a great moment. And yeah, so, and then, the scene where he's talking to him through the door, and that's such a great moment. And I feel like he doesn't, like, I guess he meant to go there to tell him that Uncle Aaron died, but I almost like that he doesn't there, because it's more of, he's thinking like, man, I did not have a great relationship with my brother, and now he's dead. I can't do the same thing with my son. I have to grow the relationship with him. And I think that having that be the basis of what the conversation was, having him not say it at that time, because, well, actually, Miles already knows, but, having him not say it at that moment makes it more powerful. And I think that scene it's one of the most emotional scenes of the movie. See, I had said earlier that the inciting incident was Uncle Aaron's death, and I think that was just part of it, because I think this scene with the door is the other half of it. Like, Uncle Aaron's death only gets him so far, and the conversation with his dad from the other side of the door, I guess it's not really a conversation, it's one-sided conversation, pushes him the rest of the way to be Spider-Man. And I think in this moment, I think there's a bit of, in this movie, some, like, he's wanting his father's approval, and he knows that his father doesn't like Spider-Man, so if he is Spider-Man, that makes their relationship even worse. And I think in this moment, his father telling him that, whatever he does, he's happy and he knows he'll be great, that sort of gives him, I think, a bit of, like, approval and a bit of the confidence to do it, where I think Uncle Aaron had been the person who had given him the confidence to do things, to make the graffiti on the wall, and to show who he really is, to be great. And I feel like his father was always trying to make him do what he wanted for him, rather what Miles wanted.
You gotta say I love you back.
Dad, are you serious?
And I think that in this moment, his father approves of him being Spider-Man. Like, of course, that's not really what he's approving. He's approving of whatever he does, which in this case means him being Spider-Man. And I think that's just the thing that he needed to feel like he could be Spider-Man. And that's why, after this, you have everything in the movie, all of the advice from Peter B. Parker, from his father, from Uncle Aaron, from all of the other Spider-Man, Spider-Gwen, Spider-Man Noir, all of that coming together to culminate to the leap of faith moment, where he takes the leap of faith from the building, and you have the now "what's up, danger" scene. And he's swinging around the city, and now he is Spider-Man, and you see the comic book go down on top of the others, like, he's now Spider-Man. And I think I want to finish by talking about one final theme from this, which I actually have mentioned before, of anybody can be Spider-Man. And that's something I said in my Spider-Man ranking, Amazing Spider-Man 2 does wrong. They make it so because Peter Parker had the DNA, because his father put his DNA in the spiders, so because he has his father's DNA, he's able to be Spider-Man. And he's the only one who could ever be Spider-Man. If anybody else was bit by the spiders, they wouldn't be able to become Spider-Man. And that's obviously not how it's supposed to be. And Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse does that perfectly. That's one of the main themes of the movie, is that anybody can wear the mask. You know, you have the line after Peter Parker's death, where MJ is saying that
He always said it could have been anyone behind the mask. He was just the kid who happened to get bit.
that's so cool, because it makes it so you could be Spider-Man, I could be Spider-Man, anybody could be Spider-Man, and that's why he's so relatable. That's why Spider-Man is a lot of people's, me included, a lot of people's favorite superhero, because he's so relatable. Because we're all the other superheroes, you got Tony Stark, billionaire, Captain America, kid from World War II, soldier who got stuck in ice, who first he got super soldier serum and then got stuck in ice for 70 years. You have Thor, a god. You have Hulk, a scientist who got gamma radiation. And you have Spider-Man, who he's just a normal kid. He's a normal, everyday kid who just happened to be in the right place at the right time to get bit by the spider, and now he's a superhero. And that's what makes him so relatable, and this movie does that perfectly. This movie shows that perfectly. So that is why Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is great. It is a great movie. It does so much. It does pretty much everything that you want from a Spider-Man movie. It plays with the self-awareness. It has very serious themes. It takes the characters on a different path, which one thing I forgot to mention was the fact that Peter B. Parker is an aged-up Peter Parker, which allowed them to give a different story than you usually get from Peter Parker, because normally he's, teenage Peter Parker, even though he may be played by a 30-year-old sometimes, but he's normally a teenager or early 20s, and in this you get an older Peter Parker, so you get sort of the washed up Peter Parker, where he's been Spider-Man for, what does he say, like 20 years, and you just get a very different story than you usually get if you have the teenage to late to early 20s Peter Parker. And I think that that's something that they did a really good job with in this movie. So, again, that is why Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is great. So please comment below your thoughts on Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And also, remember to like, subscribe, check out some of my other videos. And with that said, that's a wrap.